I became so efficient at pushing my mind and body and emotions to a red line where I knew where that line was, but I never crossed it. But I got right up to it. I knew how to operate there very well for a long period of time. I was confused and lost, and I was mad at myself. I didn't believe I was being the father I was meant and supposed to be. But at the same time, I didn't think I was being the business owner and CEO that I was meant and supposed to be. The day before she passed away, my mom said two things. She said, one, I'm gonna miss you guys so much. And she also said, if you want to see me again, you have to believe in God.
All right, guys, welcome to probably my most exciting podcast that I've ever been on, just because the guy that I'm with, the things that I've experienced in my life recently, and I'm really excited about our relationship. You know, I'm excited about how it's been this last, I don't know, what it's been, 9 or 10 months, but just the vision that I have for our relationship and the way that I feel like we have so many values that are important to you, that are important to me. And I just see the trajectory and the direction and the cadence that you're moving. And I just so admire you, man. So welcome to the Steve Weatherford Show, Nick Bear.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, man.
Like I said, I view you as a strong friend, mentor, and a foundation of a leader and father and husband, a new chapter and territory that I'm now entering.
Yeah.
And a place where I need mentorship as I grow in those roles.
It's I feel so honored when you say that, and it's such a humbling thing for you to say, because you're such a pro in so many different areas of life, like your discipline, 10 out of 10, your mindset, 10 out of 10. And I know that you know that you're not perfect, but I know a pro, right? And so there's just so many areas of life that you're a freaking samurai master. And so for you to say, hey man, there's an area of life that I'm not my best and I want to grow, and to honor me that way, man, just really says a lot about who you are and the areas of life that you're going to grow. And my mentor Keith Craft says this is, you can't benefit from what you don't honor. So the way that you're honoring me is really opening you up to benefit from that, because now I know that you admire that portion of my life. And so when it comes down to time mastery or keeping the main thing, that's something that in the past has been really hard for me, because I'm such a driven and a focused guy on one area. But I'm sure a lot of people that will listen to this podcast know all about you, but let's pretend that they don't. And I'm also going to ask some questions today, Nick, that maybe you haven't asked before, and we'll probably go in some directions that you haven't gone before. And I'm just pumped that you're on this show. I'm pumped about our relationship, but tell people where you grew up and a little bit more about your childhood.
Yeah. So grew up central Pennsylvania, small town called Palmyra, right outside of Hershey. And from the way I see it, I had an interesting dynamic growing up where my dad's side of the family were all dairy farmers, extremely hardworking people. And I watched and observed the way they lived and the discipline they instilled in their lives growing up. And my mom's side of the family, hardworking, blue collar, a lot of military individuals in that side of the family. So discipline, hard work, drive.
Yeah.
It never had to be something that my parents taught me, but they just showed me. I just observed that growing up.
Yeah.
I was never a stud athlete. I was never a stud student. I'd consider myself pretty average growing up. I had a pretty severe eating disorder when I was younger, around 14 years old, which
I didn't know that.
Yeah, had me hospitalized, and I know that had a pivotal transformational role into the person I am today.
Yeah,
it's probably what led me to love nutrition and food and fitness and body composition and everything involved in health, wellness, performance. And I went to college to study nutrition. I was on an Army ROTC scholarship. I started my business with a $20,000 loan between my junior and senior year of college. And from there, it was quick, fast-paced, action-filled life up until this point where I graduated college with a degree in nutrition, had this brand new business, went right into the Army, spent 4 years active duty. 9 of those months I spent over in South Korea as an infantry platoon leader, transitioned out of the military in 2017. And when I left, I was stationed in Texas. I got in the Army in 2017. So I spent the last 6 years building and scaling a business where I just stepped down about 6 months ago from the CEO role. I timed that up both perfectly and horribly with the birth of our baby girl, Charlie Grace. So I'm now happily married with my wife, Steph, and our newborn baby, Charlie, and I'm leading vision in the founder role of my company, Bear Performance Nutrition, and I'm navigating this next chapter and phase of life. And I've experienced loss and success and failure and these wins along the way last decade. And I've learned tremendously from all of it, but I'm still trying to learn who am I supposed to be in this next 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And becoming a dad has changed a lot of that. It shifted my priorities of who and what I want to become and why.
So this last 6 months, so Nick and I connected really in January. So I guess technically we met about a year ago because I came and did your marathon.
That's right.
That was like my first marathon ever, was I came and I did yours.
We have that same marathon here in about 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to come and run it.
Yeah.
My hamstring will be healthy by then. But that was the first time that I actually met you. And one thing that really struck me about Nick, because I'm a people watcher, I'm a noticer. And Nick was at the finish line for every single person that finished the race. And so it's really cool to have somebody that has like a slogan, go one more. But is that something that's compartmentalized in their life, or are they also a giver that way, right? Like, I got to give one more hug. So that was something that I wanted to share with my viewers and my listeners that really kind of made initial pursuit of relationship with you. And then from there, we did a podcast in about July, and you were just about to step into the season of becoming a father, the transition of not being, you're still the engine behind BPM, but not being in the day-to-day CEO role of that. So It's really unique how God brought you and I together in this unique transition period of your life. And I'm also really thankful that you and I didn't connect 5 years ago when I was really in the middle of my mess, because you would not have admired the man that I was, or the amount of time or priority that I gave my family or relationships. I would have been a guy that you would have experienced as more of a taker or more of a transactional agenda guy. So I'm glad that God changed me before I came into your life, because I feel like I can be somebody that you can count on versus somebody who's going to be like, hey, could you do this thing for me?
Creating atmosphere. You mentioned the Go One More marathon. And I was at the finish line of that marathon, and what I wanted to do was give everyone a hug that finished and put a medal around their neck. And there's 2 reasons I wanted to do that. One is when I ran Leadville 100, there was a man at the end of that race who was doing that same thing. He hugged everyone that finished the race.
Wow.
And put a ribbon across their neck. And I remembered that. Of all the things that happened during that race, that was the one thing that stood out. And I read this book, and it was called The Power of Moments. And it talks about how you can create these moments. You can create this environment, this atmosphere to shift an experience or a culture of a group of people that individuals will remember for the rest of their life. And for me, when I was thinking about putting this race on, I was thinking, how can I do something that shifts the atmosphere that people will remember? And it's this powerful moment. And that's what that was. And now whenever we plan events or we go and do things, I try to think, what is one thing that I can do that's going to shift or change the atmosphere for a better experience and memory for the people that are involved.
Yeah, you did that. It was really powerful. What did this last transition 6 months look like for you? I'm sure that some of the things that were getting your time or not getting your time now, some of the weight that you were carrying, you're not carrying now. What has that been like?
I mean, it was tough. It was arguably the hardest chapter of my life that I've experienced. Yeah. And when I was going through it, I thought I was having a quarter life crisis.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, I typically find books find me in my life at perfect times. And I found this one book. It was called From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. Mm-hmm. And it talks about how we often think we are going through a crisis, a midlife crisis, quarter life crisis, when in reality it's a transition. And every 12 to 18 months, we are naturally experiencing some sort of life transition. Mm-hmm. There's birth, there's death, there's, you get a new job, you lose your job, you get married, you get divorced. there's just life transitions that happen frequently throughout the course of our lifetime. And I was going through these two massive life transitions. One, the birth of our first child, Charlie. And then the second, I stepped down from the CEO role that I've been operating in since the inception of the business. And I was trying to find my identity and role in the business. But also I was trying to find my identity and role of being a new father, and now my supporting role as a husband, and how do I split and balance time between work and family, and what do I prioritize and what do I not prioritize, and what do I now say no to. And I was trying to navigate this life transition, and for me it hit me really hard, because I think in retrospect what was happening was I got really good at operating at red line. You know, like I became so efficient at pushing my mind and body and emotions to red line, where I knew where that line was, but I never crossed it. But I got right up to it. I knew how to operate there very well for a long period of time. What these two life transitions did was they pushed me over the red line. And I went into burnout. I went into my mind spiraling and not knowing what I was supposed to do next. And it was a really tough transition for me. I mean, my wife, Steph, she saw it. I mean, she saw it every night. I was confused and lost, and I was mad at myself because I didn't believe I was being the father I was meant and supposed to be. But at the same time, I didn't think I was being the business owner and CEO that I was meant and supposed to be. And it was a tough transition. I've slowly accepted my new role, and I've started to set boundaries in certain places and aspects of my life, and started prioritizing family for what I would honestly say is the first time in my entire life that I've done. I've finally decided to prioritize my wife, which sounds horrible and it sounds bad to even me, but I didn't realize for the last couple of years that I wasn't prioritizing Steph.
Yeah, you were just, I mean, I feel like what I'm hearing you say is you were just a passive husband. You know,
Extremely.
like you weren't doing anything that's like necessarily warranted of leaving you, but you're actually not doing anything that's warranted of staying. That's exactly where I was, just like super passive, like not owning my role, but like maybe owning too much of my role in another area. That's really powerful.
I mean, even like this last bodybuilding prep I just did, you know, that was one of the most selfish things now in retrospect that I've decided to do, because even having a conversation with Steph, yes, I was there. I was at home. I was around Charlie. I was around Steph. But mentally, I wasn't there. My body was physically there. My mind was not present. It was elsewhere. It was thinking about prep. It was thinking about that next meal. It was thinking about the all-consumed objective that I was trying to reach.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like the reason the slogan or the banner or the mantra of BPN is go one more is that's been the thing that's gotten you to where you're at, right? But go one more and then what? You know, like at what point do we go one more and then have a season of peace? And you and I have been talking about a book that you're reading that's really speaking to you, and I'm gonna read it now, but it was talking about the Sabbath. It was talking about rest. So I'd actually love for you to share a little bit more of how that's kind of talking to you in regards to, man, I can't redline all the time. I need to create like a new life formula, a new life flow that's not what it used to be.
Yeah, so the book that I just finished reading, it's The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Comer. He's a pastor. And essentially the whole book identifies what majority of society and the population is unfortunately experiencing right now is a life of hurry.
Yeah.
It's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. You know, I eat breakfast. As I'm eating breakfast, I'm thinking about what I'm eating for lunch. I'm in one meeting. Before that meeting's over, I'm thinking about the next two meetings that I have, or how late I'm going to be for the next one, and how soon I have to leave for the one I'm in right now. So in the moment that we're experiencing this thing, we're never actually experiencing it. We're thinking about the next. And by the time we get to the next, we're thinking about the next. And if we keep living our lives like that, we're never actually soaking up the present. We're not actually enjoying joy and fulfillment and happiness.
Because it's always on to the next.
It's on to the next, and we're surrounded by so many distractions. Some of them are self-induced, but as the world develops and technology advances, I don't think the distractions are going to be any lesser. They're going to be more advanced, and there's going to be an abundance of distractions that we're trying to fight off on a daily basis. It's just going to get more difficult tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. But it's having the tools, the knowledge, the toolkit of adapting to these distractions that are showing up in our lives.
No, it's really powerful, man, because the way your mindset is and the way that my mindset is naturally, kind of like I grew up kind of similar to you, is like, hey, you got to earn it, right? But if you earn it, like, you own it. And so with that mentality, it makes it very difficult for us to have a large measure of rule. And measure of rule, this my mentor teaches, is like your capacity, how much that you can handle. And for you, if you feel like I have the capability to handle more, like the bodybuilding show, well, you had time in your schedule and there was like space and like, I definitely need to create some content, but you didn't necessarily think to yourself, what would be the best move for my marriage and for my daughter? And then what's the next thing that will fit inside of that? Right. And that's like, to me, I had to flip it on its head, because I'm thinking, what do I need to do that's going to move the needle forward? And the more that I ask my wife and I ask my kids, like, what does your perfect world look like? It actually looked a whole lot different than the one that I envisioned, right? Some of the things that I thought that I needed to earn or create for my wife, she really wasn't that concerned with. But also some of the things that I didn't know she was concerned with, guess what, Nick? I got to get a whole lot more concerned with. And so it was a whole lot easier for me to hit the targets that my wife needs to feel loved. If I'm like, hey, babe, what's a target that you need me to hit? And she'll tell me. It's like her holding it up like that. If Stephanie does that for you, I already know you're the type of guy that's going to knock it out. But because we don't ask the right questions, we don't get the right targets. And so we actually, as men, create own targets for ourselves. Like, it's almost like there's some peace in my life, so I need to create like some chaos. I need to be hurrying. And I feel like I wasn't following along super close, but it seemed like you were supposed to do a competition that was further out, but you knew that you were like, man, this is not the greatest lifestyle choice for me. You moved the date up.
Yeah, it was supposed to be April 15th.
Okay, yeah, you did move it up, right?
And I moved it to March 25th.
And you still got the dub.
Yeah, I mean, I got lean enough. I was on track. Like,
yeah, you look great.
Me extending that prep out another 3 weeks.
And looking, what, another 2% leaner?
Yeah.
Are you going to be extra more proud of yourself? But think about how much more like delaying gratification. When I say gratification, I'm talking about basic things like carbs. You know what, Nick? You need carbs for energy. You need carbs for mood. What do you need for your family? Energy and mood, presence, right? And when you and I are like, because we're sucked out on carbs, or like it's the day before the show, and I never did bodybuilding competitions, but I did magazine shoots where you would like dehydrate and all these things, and I would be like awful like the last 5 days when I'm carb depleting. For what? I mean, I'm proud for like a cover, and I did it once, but Nick, since I did muscle and fitness, how many more covers have you seen me do? Nuggets, bro.
Yeah.
You know, and if I do one, I might diet for a week, you know, because to me, the dad that I am, the father that I am, the friend that I am, that requires like energy. And I'm going to like prioritize, obviously, my relationship with God. And then those things before I am kind of like silly goals that I create for myself. So that really just goes to show your own personal self-awareness of like, man, you know what, this was probably not the wisdom choice right now. And even having this real-time conversation with me, like I can tell you're already thinking different. You're just taking action. And then on this one, you took action and then you thought.
I always viewed the decisions that I was making as my role as a provider.
Yeah.
And I justified a lot of the things I've done as, well, this is my responsibility and obligation as the provider. So I'm going to, if there was a hierarchy of my duties and responsibilities, provider's number one, I'm going to assign objectives based off of being a provider, and then everything else in our life is going to adjust and change based off of that goal. And it wasn't until Charlie was born that shifted. Because you quickly realize as a parent, your time's not your time anymore, and you can't be selfish with it.
It was hard for me as your friend to like help you to understand like things are going to change in the most magical way, but like now you know what you know. Like, how could you articulate it to somebody that's about to go through it? It's very hard to put into words because it's a spiritual thing too. Like, man, when you look at something that God gave you, man, like Priorities shift quick, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, like so quick.
So quick. I mean, it was literally this, like, the only way to describe it, an awakening.
Yeah.
Like, I know this feeling and this emotion was in my body, but it wasn't awakened until Charlie was born. And it didn't necessarily, like, happen as soon as she was born, but it was over the last 9 months.
Because you weave your heart into their heart,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's shifted my priorities. It's shifted. I used to be work. From the time I woke up at 5 a.m., and then after dinner, I would go back to the computer. I'd work until 11 or 12 p.m.
Yeah.
I did this for years and years and years. And I was very proud of this. I had a lot of pride behind being a workaholic.
Yeah.
And
because that's what a man does, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, it was like this.
Right.
This is what I'm supposed to do. And like,
I mean, from all the movies that we've watched, the man, the number one thing he does, he checks. If he doesn't check that box, all the other ones doesn't matter. So, like, a man, you're right. Number one, he freaking provides and he does it well.
What's interesting is, I forget where I was hearing. I think it was actually in. It might have been in the book, The Ruthless, Elimination of Hurry. But talking about how times have changed, even the perception and realities of work have changed. For example, when people used to promote a Rolex watch or a Ferrari sports car, they would have someone wearing this watch or driving this car, sitting on a cliff in Italy, drinking a cup of coffee, relaxing. Now, decades later, the way they're promoting a Rolex watch and a Ferrari sports car is someone leaving the office last at 11:36 p.m.
And enjoying the spoils.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like now we are, we're rewarding hustle culture and work and leaving your family behind. And if you want to achieve X, Y, and Z, be the lone wolf, work your face off, forget everyone else, but be lonely and by yourself and unhappy and unfulfilled. And I had that realization, the really harsh realization of, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to be alone in a few years. Not by choice.
Yeah. If you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to get more of what you have right now. And kind of like in my own testimony and story, I got to a point of like checking enough of those boxes to think like, if I sacrifice more, I'm just going to get more of what I've already got. And so I know what's out there. It's got to be relational. It can't be any types of achievements, because I checked some of these boxes I never thought that I'd check. And I think that's what's happening for you too. Like, you're checking some boxes you never even dreamed of. I mean, think about your supplement company. For some of the people listening, they don't realize, I think you launched it like while you were in the Army.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I launched it in college. I grew it when I was in the Army.
Yeah, I mean, like, could you ever have dreamed that you would have partners that would come alongside you at the gravity that you've come alongside you, that your company would be valued at what it's valued and it's heading where it's heading? Would you have ever imagined that?
No.
Yeah, who could? People would say, yeah, right. You want to know why? Because at the time, nobody had probably ever done what you're doing right now, at that time. Bootstrapping it, with like zero investors, it's unheard of. It was only the big companies that were like, had corporate backing and tons of investors. And so, like, I totally get the rare breed that you are and what it requires to be able to do something that nobody's ever done before. So I say those things to honor you, but I also say those things to really encourage you, because you're realizing what got you to this level isn't going to get you to the next, right? Yeah. Meaning, like, man, going one more isn't going to do it in my marriage if I'm not also showing up for Charlie. Like, I love your Instagram stories when I see you feeding her breakfast every single morning, the Charlie cakes.
Charlie cakes.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about, I'm hearing you say it was really hard transition, almost like a midlife, or you say a quarter life crisis. And you had mentioned, off camera, like, hey, this is still something like I'm still reestablishing, I even think for me, man, I'm like reminding myself who I am every single morning. The boldness or the confidence that you get to experience when I came in here. Well, dude, that was after like an hour with God. I'm like, God, will you remind me who I am, and like that I'm powerful and I'm forgiven and all that stuff. So I'm excited for you, man, because it's almost kind of like moving to a new school. You get to decide who you want to be.
Honestly, that's the way it feels. I think there's trauma, mental and emotional trauma that comes from doing multiple things, but like building a business and bootstrapping it. And for me, I finally got the business 10 years later to a certain point where I didn't have to keep working till midnight every night, but I kept doing it because what I knew got us to a certain point.
Yeah.
I was afraid to not do that anymore because I didn't want to lose momentum, get my foot off the gas at all. And when you get so used to operating a certain way and you see the result of it, changing the way you do that is often scary.
Yeah.
And I was forced to change the way I was doing things based off of my family growing in this next chapter and season of life. So I got scared. I got scared and intimidated to operate in a way that I hadn't up until this point because I didn't want to lose momentum. And I didn't want to not grow as fast. And you know what? When I stepped down from the CEO role and put Kat Thomas in place, who's a badass operator, we grew. You know, I was able to move to more of a visionary role.
Yeah, your best and your highest use.
Exactly. And the business grew more. So that is a testament to, if you keep doing what you've been doing forever, like you said, what got you here is not necessarily going to get you there. It's easier said than done. But if you put the people in place and you delegate and elevate and you really focus on your priorities and you understand your mission, your vision, your values, it can work.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like it's scary. It's scary to, everybody says, hey, dance with who you brought to prom, right? It's scary to switch partners, right? It's scary to like let go of something that you know is going to be there for you. And I've always danced with them, but switching partners can be scary. And for me, it was letting go of something that I put my heart and soul into and just believing that what's next is going to be better, but it's going to require more. But more doesn't mean more grind. It could just be like more space, right?
More presence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what space is. Space is atmosphere, right? And we create that with our presence. And one thing I noticed when I was running and gunning and so focused on building and scaling is when I was home, I brought like funk home with me versus like, oh, dad's home. It was almost like, my wife used to say this 5 years ago, when my headlamps would pull down the driveway, it was almost like her anxiety would rise because she wouldn't know what kind of guy was going to come home. Was he going to be like on his phone and like finishing things up and then go straight into his office and do a Facebook Live for his fitness community? Or is he going to come home and he made a lot of money and then he's going to be really happy and joyful? Like I was so all over the place. Like, what kind of leader is that? Yeah. I brought so much of my baggage home. And then I had a moment where I'm like, man, I might be providing the way that I want to provide, but the atmosphere that I'm creating is not an atmosphere that I would want to be around. No wonder my relationship with my wife is like friction nearly all the time, and we don't have any sexual or like emotional intimacy because I'm unpredictable. You know, I'm emotional. I'm all over the place. But that came from me taking Adderall to try to keep up with the pace and smoking weed to try to go to sleep. So I know that drugs haven't been a part of your coping mechanism, but what's a way that you have coped with the pressure or the anxiety or the racing thoughts that, man, you're like, man, I can't handle it this way anymore? Because for some people it's food. For other people it's drugs. You know, it doesn't seem like you overeat or do drugs, and you don't seem like much of a drinker. So what's the thing that you're like, man, the way that I coped with it last year is not the way that I'm going to cope with it this year?
It's interesting. You know, a few months ago, if you would have asked me this question, I would have said, I don't know. But I was on Lewis House's podcast a few months ago.
I love Lewis.
And then I had Thomas DeLauer on.
Also a good friend of mine too. I love him.
He was on my podcast last week. And both of them said something similar that has made me really think about a coping mechanism that I've used in my life. That is training and prepping for some sort of big event.
Yeah, staying busy, right?
Staying busy. And the first like big prep that I ever did was my Ironman prep in 2019. And I started it right after my mom passed away from cancer. So, you know, I came back from Pennsylvania after her funeral, and I dove right into that prep, which was a big distraction for...
It's all-consuming.
For everything I was feeling. right? Like I kind of like, I don't want to say I ignored the fact that my mom passed away from cancer, but I spent all my free time either working or training. So I had no time to think about it. Mm. And from that race in 2019 up until last weekend for my bodybuilding show, I've gone from prep to prep to prep.
Yeah.
Ironmans, ultras, 70.3s, marathons, bodybuilding preps. I mean, for the last 4 years, I've gone nonstop from prep to prep to prep. And I think that's been my coping mechanism for just sanity.
Yeah, I think discipline makes you feel freer, makes you feel secure. So if you have a plan to be disciplined in, that gives you some security.
Well, I think that's why I honestly had an eating disorder when I was 14 years old, is this ability to control and be disciplined with just something. It so happened to be food. That gave me some sort of sense of just
power and authority.
Exactly. Over myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unique how much our childhood really is so ingrained in us and can help us to create success and empire in one area. But if we don't really deal with the genesis or the trauma, like you said, now, as you begin to unpack and figure these different things out, now you can say yes to the right things, right? And I think one of the ways that you're stepping into that is starting to share a little bit of your leadership and your legacy weight with other men. And that's like a new thing for you too, because when you left the military, it was just you, so you've been, like you said, lone wolfing it for quite a while. In the last 10 minutes that we have, Nick, I would love to know your relationship. Like, when did your relationship with God start? What was your upbringing? I'm hearing you grew up in Pennsylvania. So tell us a little bit more of that backstory.
I mean, going to church growing up was something we did. I wouldn't say growing up I had a relationship with God, but we go on Sundays. It wasn't every Sunday. We were athletes growing up, so we were going and playing sports. And if we missed church, it was okay. But if we were home in town, we were going to church. And we were always part of the church. But when I was in church, I was sitting there zoned out thinking about something else. You know what I mean? I'd never, growing up through high school, even when I was in church, I wasn't listening to the pastor.
Checking the box, right?
Yeah.
That's how it was.
Went to college, stopped going, didn't really think much of it. Graduated, joined the Army. When I was in Ranger School, actually, that's when my relationship with God started getting reignited.
Because you needed to depend on something bigger than yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
Like so I'm getting beat down I was there for 4.5 months, and once a week we had the chaplain come in and do a service.
Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name. I remember what he looked like. I remember him playing guitar. I remember we would be at these services. We'd be crying. Yeah. All these Ranger School students crying, and the way they got us
just like crying out to God, right?
Yeah, and singing the songs. And the way they would get us into these services was, you're getting starved in this school. So if you're
snacks in church,
if you come to church, they give you'd walk in through the line, they give you a piece of bread, and they put a scoop of peanut butter on it. So they get you into services. Services was 45 minutes, and the Ranger instructors couldn't touch you there, so you were safe. And it gave us this sense of purpose and something we could look and lean on during these really difficult and hard times. And that's when I started reading my Bible in my free time in Ranger School, and I really leaned into my faith there. But as soon as Ranger School was done, it stopped. Yeah. Again, it went away. I didn't even think about it.
That was like, if I can interject, that was like in the NFL. We had chapel once a week during training camp, and that's when people didn't know whether or not they were going to go to make the team. Bro, chapel would be freaking packed during training camp. As soon as final cuts were over, nobody showed up. Yep. Everybody needed Jesus until final cuts. It sounds exactly like Ranger School.
That's exactly how. It would be jam-packed. That's funny.
Man, we want God when we need him, but when we don't need him, we're like, okay, you can go away now.
So I graduated from that school 2014. Spent the next couple of years in the Army. And then right when I left the military, I was building BPN, bootstrapping the business. Going to church was not on my mind.
Right.
And it wasn't till my mom got sick with cancer then that when she got sick, it's not even that I started praying. It's not even that I started going to church or like my faith got stronger. It was the last week we were with my mom when she was on hospice. So we knew she was pretty sick, but both my mom and dad kind of kept it from us how sick she was, because me and my brother were in Texas trying to build a business, working nonstop. And it really was a phone call. My dad called. He said, hey, your mom's in the ICU. They're giving her 7 days to live. You guys got to get home right now.
Dang.
And for us, we were like, we knew it was bad, but.
That's a gut punch.
Yeah, we didn't know.
You think if you get a phone call, you got a few months, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So 7 days. So we rush home. She's in the ICU when we got there. And then it was probably 2 days after we got there, and they pulled her out of the ICU, sent her home on hospice. So we get back to the house. Hospice gets her set up in my childhood home growing up. We all pretty much camped in the living room with my mom until she passed away in there. But the day before she passed away, because me and Steph were supposed to get married a few months later, and we didn't want her to miss the ceremony, so we did a small unofficial ceremony with my pastor growing up in the living room with my mom there, so she could experience it.
Wow.
And when the ceremony was over, my mom said two things. She said, one, I'm going to miss you guys so much. And she also said, if you want to see me again, you have to believe in God. And I'll never forget where I was standing, where she was sitting, how she said that, what her face looked like when she said that.
Wow.
And Steph and I came home after she passed away and all the funeral obligations were complete, found a church here in Texas, and just started going. And just started submerging ourselves in the church and leaning into our faith, having conversations. Before we got married, we never really talked about where faith was going to be in our relationship. The conversation never came up. It wasn't until after we got married that conversation was a conversation.
Wow.
How is faith going to be a part of our life? How do we want our kids to view Jesus in their relationship with God, and where and how we go to church and what that's like in our home. Now, to say that we are great Christians and our faith is super strong, and we have
I think all Christians suck at being Christians. We're trying to be like Christ. We all suck.
We have an amazing relationship with God. We're not there yet, but it's something we're actively working on.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation Steph and I have frequently, and especially now that Charlie's born, it's even stronger for us. It's more of a priority for us, and it's a priority in our life that we are trying to prioritize more. So that's where we're at right now. Our faith is there. Our relationship with God is getting stronger. We have a lot to work on and improve still, but it's present, it's there, and it's a priority now.
It's really powerful. Thanks for sharing that story with me, man. I've never heard that part of your story. Have you shared that before?
Bits and pieces.
Wow.
Bits and pieces.
Man, I'm so honored, man. That was a really powerful moment with your mom. I mean, I oftentimes think about like those last couple of moments and just being surrounded with my family and like, what are the words? What are my last words? Because she had a lot of time to think about what are the last things that I want to say to my sons.
Yeah.
And she said, believe in God, and I'll see you again.
Yeah, she gave me this
Think
Bible.
about the peace that she had to say that.
I know. She gave me this Bible before she passed away, and she wrote notes in different parts of the Bible. And then one of the blurbs in there, which I've shared on social before, is she said, teach your kids to love the Lord. And she wrote that right in the beginning of the book.
Wow.
So it's just like she left these little bits and pieces for us to remember.
Yeah.
It was very obvious that before she passed away, she wanted us to have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
Because she did her entire life. It wasn't something that she just found when she got sick. My mom, very consistently, was a part of the church, was a very active, not passive, active Christian.
Yeah.
And had a relationship with God.
Wow.
But yeah, she wanted us to know that.
Wow. It would be a yes or no answer. Do you feel like you love the Lord?
Yes.
Dude, your mom is in heaven and she's looking down at you and angels are rejoicing, because if you think about your mom's number one top priority, she wrote in that Bible, and it was what?
Yeah.
I got goosebumps, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's interesting because people have asked me the question before, like, how has losing your mom affected your faith? And if anything, it's made it stronger. You know, like my mom was like such an amazing person, and even like she was so involved with the church, and she was so involved in the community. And I remember planning the funeral with the pastor, and he pulled me aside. He's like, "I think God took the wrong one. I think he took the wrong one in this case." And it never affected my faith. Like I said, I think it made it stronger because of what I've learned about my mom through the experience. So I think there was a reason that my mom got sick and my mom's in heaven, because I know it made a significant impact on not just my life, but Steph's life and Charlie's life in the future and our future kids. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're living the legacy that she was dreaming of, and you didn't even really know. That's a crazy thing about parents. Like, I didn't really appreciate the greatest part of my dad when I was a kid. I always looked at like the gaps of my dad, not like touching me and rubbing me and telling me I'm a good boy and he's proud of me all the time. Like, he was a great dad, but like those were some of the things that like were not his jam, And I always felt like but then now I'm 40 years old and I look back on my dad and all of the times that, bro, he missed so much. He coached every single soccer team that I was on from age 4 to 18. My dad learned soccer from a library book. My dad never missed a college football game, not one. He would drive 17 hours to Penn State to watch me punt like 6 times. I'm a punter, dude. Like, it ain't that deep, Dad. You can watch it on, but you know what? Now I'm realizing I got all these kids and they have all these activities. And I'm not being like my dad was being, meaning showing up at every single one, A, because it's impossible, but B, now I'm realizing the price that my daddy paid, right? For me to know what faithfulness is. And when you and I stand before God, he's going to look at us and judge us for our time, our talents, and our treasures. You and I have talked about this before. And the words that we want to hear is, well done, good and faithful servant. Notice he said faithful. So faithful matters a lot to God. And my daddy was so faithful. So some of the times, especially in the past when I've talked about my dad, some people are like, man, your dad seems really rough. No. I hate it that some people would see that. But my dad was just imperfect by comparison to God. Right now that I know God, and like you, man, I love God because I just see his goodness all over my life. And I believe this. I don't believe that God authored your mother to pass away when she did, but evil did enter the world, disease and all these different things entered the world. But I don't believe God will ever waste anything like that from happening without drawing us closer in. And so really what I'm hearing you say is, I don't know why that happened, but I know that it increased my faith instead of making me turn my back on God. Yeah. Because my mom's last wishes were for this to draw you in closer to God, not just, hey, remember me in those times that we had. Because sure, those are some of the things that you want to mention at the end, but no, her final words were like, I want you to know God because I'm about to meet him. Mm-hmm. It's really powerful.
And extremely powerful.
How have you leaned on God more in these last 6 months, knowing what you know, what you learned then, and really probably feeling more helpless? I don't want to say hopeless because your life is amazing, but more helpless than ever before because now there are less things that are able to be controlled by you.
I think the biggest issue that I don't want to say always have had, but through this transition specifically, is trying to control every part of the transition.
Yeah, because it's not like carbs and proteins. You can't pull them out and put them in like that, right?
You change one thing, something else changes, or 10 things change as you're trying to manipulate this other change. And I think that the greatest thing that I can do and that I've done over these last couple months is trusting God, trusting the plan, and showing up and really focusing on having and building that relationship, and prioritizing for our entire family, going to church and reading the Bible and having conversations and just focusing on building those relationships and trying to control less, but trusting and reading books. Like honestly, like the Ruthless, Elimination of Hurry, like there is so much to take out of there of just slowing down and simplifying. And we had this massive conversation, Steph and I, we're both reading this book right now. We both just finished it. And it talks about the Sabbath and like actually using the Sabbath as a rest day, not a catch-up day, but actually a rest day. And Steph and I both have had this conversation of, one, how do we have a day that's just rest? Where do we catch up the rest of the week? But
I can help.
Yeah, but we need that for our relationship. We need that for our family. We need that to reset for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
We need to slow down. And that's something I have historically been very bad at, is slowing down and simplifying.
Yeah, it's really good. Thanks for sharing that, man. I would say the last question that I have, and then we'll pray, is how or what would you say to people that are listening or watching to this? Because you're saying like, hey man, I'm not even like a great Christian yet, but like I'm taking my family to church, I'm reading my Bible. What would your advice to them be if they're not actively spiritually leading at home? Because I feel like what you're saying right now is, man, I know that I can be doing it better, but I'm doing it now. And I'll tell everybody else, like I may seem like I'm doing it with more of a format. I'm 7 years older than Nick. And I have great mentors and coaches that have like instilled into me and been pouring into me. And I feel like that's part of the reason that God's brought me into your life, is to kind of pour some of that experience into you, so you don't make some of the mistakes that I made. And so things that took me 3 years to implement in my marriage, you know, they can take you 1 year for your marriage. So what are the things that you would give to people that want to have an awakening? You know, kind of like what you said, you've had an awakening when your kid was born and you said, I'm going to live differently now. What would your advice to them be?
I mean, earlier you talked about the 3 men you need in your life, and one of those being Paul, as a spiritual leader.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't say why I've struggled with my faith, but why it hasn't been strong historically up until more recently is I haven't had a spiritual leader that I resonated with and connected with. You know, growing up in a pretty traditional church in a small town in Pennsylvania, it was a very traditional service. I couldn't find much relatability in the things that we were discussing or talking about. It was very from the Bible, very just scripture.
Yeah, hard to see application in like real time now, right?
Yeah, and I think now as I've gotten older, and I don't know if just the way some churches have changed or just
the stories are more real now.
I guess some of the stories are more applicable to the life I'm living now.
Yeah,
I'd say like the biggest piece of advice that Steph and I have at least implemented is finding a spiritual leader, being at church, whether online or offline. I mean, we go to church in person, but we also watch services online. Finding a church that you can connect with people that you can connect with, and that resonate with you, and that are relatable, and the message is clear, and it connects with the life that you're living. Because if there is that disconnect, you're not going to soak it up.
Yeah,
you're not going to want to keep learning and growing. So I think it's finding a way in which you can learn that speaks to you the best. That's my biggest piece of advice, and that's what we've done, and that's what's helped us tremendously.
That's good. Well, Nick Bear, I love you, man. This has been fun. You and I are actually, and I didn't even say this, I'm in Nick Bear's new podcast studio. So him and I just recorded for his podcast before this, and it was an amazing 1.5-hour conversation. And man, I just so appreciate you even putting me on your audience. Last time we got together, I feel like God moved, and it was amazing. So more than likely, your podcast will come out before mine, and I'll save this one for a couple weeks afterwards, so then people can go from this one to the next one. But let's pray. Absolutely. And man, thanks for being on here and sharing some of the stories and parts of yourself that you maybe wouldn't have shared otherwise, man.
Thanks, Steve.
So one thing that I wanted to pray, and Nick kind of mentioned this earlier, was before we get into prayer, is his mom's final words were like, man, just know God and love God. And that's the most important thing that I feel like I'm supposed to do with my life, Nick, is to let people hear stories so they could be open to a relationship with God. And so knowing God is really, it's a 3-part thing. It's receiving Jesus. And what does receiving Jesus look like? It looks like you just declaring that, hey, Jesus was the Son of God and he lived a perfect life, that he died on the cross for my sins, and then he rose again. And he lived a perfect life. And so that's really what I'm about to walk everybody through on this podcast, is just saying those things. And then everybody that receives Jesus for the first time, they don't realize it, Nick, but angels will be rejoicing in heaven where your mom's at. So your mom will be among the angels, freaking heaven or heavenly pom-poms, celebrating when people say yes to Jesus on this podcast. And it happened because you were real enough to share your real story and share that snippet about your mom. So I just wanted to honor you for creating the atmosphere for me to pray this prayer, because when people receive Jesus, that's one of the highest honors that we can do for God. And then when that happens, when we get to heaven, God wants to expand our territory, because I believe that we'll have a house and a home and these different things and territory in heaven. And when we use our time, our talents, and our treasures to bring more people to heaven, and we do it in collaboration like this, you also get rewarded when we pray this prayer. So your mom's going to be real happy with you, man. Love you, cuz. All right, so let's pray this prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I admit that I've sinned before and I've missed the mark. And right now, I just admit that Jesus is the Son of God and he lived a perfect life. And right now, I just ask for his forgiveness for those sins. And I ask that Jesus would come into my heart. And I'm believing that living for Jesus, that the rest of my life will be the best of my life. And before I end this prayer, I just ask that, Holy Spirit, that you would fill me, that you would guide me in your spirit. And it's in Jesus' name that I pray these things. Amen.
Amen.
So if you prayed those prayers, I would love for you to send me a DM on Instagram. Send Nick a DM on Instagram, and we'll put links in the show notes for all of our Instagrams and his YouTube and all of the places that you can find him. Is it bpmsups.com?
bpnsups.com.
Yeah, bpnsups.com. We'll put links to all of his things. So I want you to go over, send him messages and tell him how much this conversation impacted you, not just in the natural, but in the supernatural. I believe that people are going to make decisions for Jesus because of our friendship together. So thanks for being a kingdom partner with me, Nick Bear. Love you, man.
Thanks, Steve. Love you, man.
All right, guys. So if you enjoyed this episode, share this with somebody. I believe that this podcast has God's hands on it, and I can't wait to see families healed, identities restored, and people come into not a religion with Jesus, but a relationship with Jesus, because God loves you. He has a plan for your life, and Nick is here to agree with me. So we'll see you guys next week.